My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to the AstroHistorian. This is a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. Today, we're at the floor of IAE 2955 with Anvil Aerospace. Welcome to the lore tours of IAE 2955. My name is Paul Berserker 01 Batman Shelley, your professor here on the AstroHistorian. I am live here on the floor. I've got a couple people who are going to be joining me shortly, but the purpose of these is for me to kind of give you a brief overview. Pull this up real quick. Go. All right, there we go. Now I'm unmuted in game as well. A brief history of the manufacturers on the floor, and then from there we'll move to looking at the actual ships on the floor to give you kind of a history of when they were created and a little bit of a history behind them. I have all my notes up. All right. So, let's get started with Anvil. I've got one pantsless dude here, which is good. That's probably Shimpasta. Yeah. So let's first start off with Anvil Aerospace as a whole. Change some stuff real here to make sure we're not. It's all good. Anvil Aerospace. Now, Anvil Aerospace is an interesting company because it was founded in 2772, but its history goes back further to the Second Tavaran War, the late 2500s, early 2600s. A man by the name of Leonard Case, founded specifically in 2599. Leonard Case was an RSI engineer, very famous for his work. He was very good. He worked on something called the Starbright project, which itself became the prototype for what would eventually become the Aurora. The Starbright had been around for a very long time, but the 2600 Starbright was a completely revolutionary work up. And he originally started off as I believe he started off as like a smaller designer, like an interim designer, but he found some issues and he brought it up to to his superior, and the superior was like, it's not that big, and so he jumped the line and told like the head of the project. The head of the project looked into it and was like, yeah, this is really bad. We need to fix this now. And so he ended up being put as the head of the Starbright team because of that. And his redesign from the ground up for the 2600 Starbright became the main solution to how RSI builds ships going forward. Like I said, it's the prototype for the Aurora, what the Aurora would be. Easy to use, fun to fly, single seat ships. This is coming just off of the heels of like the end of the Zeus era for RSI, but before the beginnings of the Constellation. But after he released the 2600 Starbright, he immediately left the company because he hated the red tape and all the bureaucracy involved in RSI. So he formed his own company called Case Aerospace, where he created his own luxury yacht. Similar to the Starbright, easy to use, really fun, but it's like personal, in 2604. Unfortunately, that was right when the Second Tavaran War happened, so his Cosmos sloop which was this yacht completely sold like dog ass, and he ended up having to go to work for the UAE military, where he built what we know today as the Hurricane, which is sort of an inverse reflection of a Tavaran ship called the Jackal, which used a second seat design where the second seat controlled like engineering and shields and was able to actually move power and move the shields around to deflect incoming fire, while the pilot just focused on flying. And so he basically inverted that by taking the second seat and putting all the firepower in the second seat so that they could use it to defeat the Tavaran shield technology. It did really well, but it came at the end of the Second Tavaran War. And shortly after that, Case was given a contract to build a corvette, the first modern corvette of the UAE Navy, after they rotated out their old corvettes at the end of the First Tavaran War. But unfortunately, Leonard Case died in a spacecraft accident shortly after they got the contract. And when the Hurricane was taken out of service, Case Aerospace folded. Jump forward to 2742, middle of the downfall of the Messer era. A man by the name of Jude Harris Arnold was born to real estate moguls on Terra, probably Nova Kiev, Terra. And there he became fascinated with Leonard Case's work and was obsessed with sort of building on that legacy. So when he got his job at Aegis Dynamics as a junior designer, when he first left college in 2763, he was put on to Project Monitor. And there he was given the lead to develop one of the versions of what would eventually become the Aegis Hammerhead. So the Hammerhead was his design, partially. The prototype that he built never really didn't do well, and he tried to get feedback for his design from his superiors, but none of them gave any feedback that was constructive. So he began to feel like J. Harris Arnold and how he felt like he was abandoned by his superiors. There's just, the bureaucracy wasn't there to help designers, it was there to hinder designers. And what he really took from Case was this sort of democratization of ship design. Everyone in the process of the design could basically throw up a red flag and say no at any point. The whole idea was for him for them to be able to build on the fly. And that's what made his step into creating Anvil Aerospace in 2772 so important. It was sort of everyone had a say, open sort of office, so every member of the project was on equal footing, and they could discuss all matters. Eventually, obviously, if the designer had to pull the trigger, they would, but there were stops in place to make sure that everyone was on board with the project. And so his first design was known as, what we know today, was a fighter called the Osprey. And it wasn't super well, it was just not super well known, but it was well known enough that he used his Aegis connections to get it looked at by the UAE Navy, who liked it and actually purchased some rounds, but maybe not enough to really justify it beyond just sort of, hey, we have this in our back pocket if we need it. And in the aftermath of the anti-Messer revolution, Aegis lost a lot of clout, and the Navy had to sort of rebuild from scratch. And one of the things they were looking to do was build a ship whose job was to scout out distant systems, but wasn't a dedicated long-range scout. something that could be carried on board a Idris and like basically screen out a system for the Idris before it arrives, or to be able to leave the Idris in one system, go to another system to operate, and then return back to make things cheaper. And this became known as the Terrapin, because the Anvil was given the job after the Osprey had done pretty well. Anvil didn't have a lot of connections with the Mezer's regime in the first place, so they gave him a shot. And the Terrapin became so well loved by its operators that they began to even purchase the, when they left the Navy, they would even purchase surplus ones off the market to use them for their own purposes. That would then lead to more ships, and we'll talk about those here in a moment. But soon, J. Harris Arnold and Anvil Aerospace became the golden child of the new UEE. They found their Aegis Dynamics in Anvil Aerospace. So Anvil quickly became the default manufacturer that the new UEE would turn to for any small ship requirements, which led to the sort of balance between RSI and Aegis. Larger ships went to RSI typically, smaller ships went to Anvil. And the two worked pretty well hand in hand for most of the 29th century. It's only in the 30th century that we start to see them start to step on each other with things like the Scorpius and the Carrack, and well, the Carrack was before that, but the Liberator. So we're starting to see them compete more, but in the early days, they were much more collaborators rather than antagonistic. Jude Harris Arnold would die. J. Harris Arnold would die in 2853. But he passed on the legacy to the rest of his team, and they continue to make ships to this very day. With that being said, let's go over and talk about one of the earliest of these ships over here, the Hornet. Arguably one of the most famous ships of Anvil Aerospace. That is an important way of showing the design ethos of Anvil. So the Hornet was built originally in 2806. While the Avenger had done pretty well as a carrier fighter, the Hornet, they needed something that was designed specifically to fight the Van Duel, but was flexible enough to still deal with a possible threat from the Xi'an and other targets as well. So Anvil went to work and created the F-7A, which we know as the F-7A Hornet. The F-7A quickly became one of the most impressive fighters that humanity had ever made. This thing was so flexible that famously, Arya Reily, the famous leader of Squadron 42 at the time, said there was not a situation that a Hornet could not find its way out of. She called it specifically, the damn thing is cursed to succeed. So the Hornet became one of the best multi-role fighters the UAE had ever built, and it's pretty small in its profile, and was, for instance, we know, terrified the Xi'an. To give you context, they built the Santok Yai specifically because of this ship. This ship is a terror to pretty much anyone who doesn't use it. As a result, it's become pretty much ubiquitous with Anvil's name. And it wasn't until after the F-8, which we'll talk about here, that the F-7 would get another look in. After about over 100 and almost 50 years since its original build, there was a lot of things that needed to change. And one of the big things that changed in the early 30th century was because of Aegis's pivot towards selling to civilians, Anvil, and of course the success of Drake Interplanetary with the Cutlass, Anvil wanted to start selling Hornets to the populace, not just decommissioned surplus, but civilian from the factory Hornets, which the UAE surprisingly said, yes, please God, yes, I'm tired of these Cutlasses everywhere, because the Cutlass was sort of a blank, like sort of an insult to the UAE, because they had literally snubbed them in the first place. And so the F-7C, the first version of the Hornet that was for civilian use, was sold around the 2908, I think. It was about 100 years after the initiation of the F-7A. And it was only like 20, 30 years after that that we got the variants of the F-7A, the Tracker, the Ghost, and the Super Hornet. And that process itself led to the creation of the Mark II. Because in the process of them updating things for the civilian market, they found some things they wanted to improve upon, things that they, as technology has advanced. And so they developed the Mark II-A, the F-7A Mark II, as a replacement for the original Hornet, even though the F-8 had replaced the original Hornet in the first place. Because just like today with the F-15, you have so much replacement parts, you have so many things laying around already in your logistics, it kind of makes sense to keep it around if it still does the job well. That's kind of what the Mark II ended up becoming. Few things needed to be replaced, but for by and large, it's mostly the same ship with a couple of improved components and placements and such. So I'm going to give you an example of what Anvil is known for. So I want you to first off take a look at the logo. Delta, a little bit of a tail with a circle, a broken circle with a delta through it, right? Look at the profile. It comes to a point, flares out into a delta, and what's at the center? A circle. All Anvil ships are built the exact same way. All of them come to a point in some way. Sometimes it's a flat point, but it's still a point. Curve back at least a little bit into a semi-delta shape with a circle somewhere at the top to the back rear of the stuff. You can see the circle right there, right? Oop, no, I don't want to go in. Oh, whatever.
Stuff like this is exactly why I love going to the IAE so much.
Seeing it in person is a lot different than imagined.
Yeah, we get up. Even the Hawk has a tiny circle. And here, let's take a look at the Paladin. What's that at the top? Is that a circle? It looks like a circle, chat. What's this? A delta that folds out into the back with a circle in the center? Once you start noticing the pattern, it's pretty obvious. Every single Anvil ship is got the same pattern in it. It is the case Aerospace style because it originates with the Hornet or with the Hurricane that we know of because we've never seen the Cosmos Sloop. But even this F8 Delta sort of like comes to a flat point in the back, circle right there, right? Flares out. So let's talk a little bit about the F8. The F8 was in the running with three other ships: the Aegis's Dogfighter 3000 and the RSI Black Widow. This was it's called the Next Generation Starfighter, and it was built in 2933. So in the 2930s was when it was built. The goal was to replace the aging Hornet with a new design. And that became the F8A Lightning. The thing you have to understand about the difference is that between the Hornet and the Lightning. Let's take a look at the Hornet right there. You see it has some tapering lines off. But it still has that big circular section. It's got some wings. But a lot of that stuff is sort of separate. Like the wings are their own. The wings are their own individual piece. The wings of the F8 are built into the fuselage. So it's more of like a delta rather than a separate wing. Though you do kind of see a little bit of them separate here. The body's a lot chunkier, and even this front area, these things actually come down in flight to protect the sides of the pilots, and they're sort of angled. The reason why is experience with the Van Duel taught a lot of designers that one of the things the Van Duel love to do, if they can, is to melee. Even in their ships. The ships are designed to come in and strike craft. So if a Van Duel is coming in to strike you in a melee hit in space, if they manage to do it, having a curved surface will deflect the blow. So you have to have some sort of armor that can sort of like direct the attack away from your fuselage. So the F8 is designed with everything that they've learned from fighting the Van Duel. It's heavy, it has a lot of firepower, and it's got a lot of sloping curves with a lot of armor to protect it from attacks. Despite that, its emphasis is on speed and maneuverability, even for its size. It's designed to be the best of all worlds. Its flaws in the F7C that we have now, because I'm saying that now because I know somebody is going to go, but Paul, the F7C sucks, or the F8C sucks in game. It's because it's the civilian version. Effectively, this was released in the last couple of years as a civilian version, similar to the F8 or the F7C, the F8C, similar. So the Van Duel just like the Kamikaze? No, their ships are designed specifically to melee. The glaive and the scythe, the wings are actual like rigid blades. They're like rigid striking blades. They're designed to strike at a target. So they ram, but they ram with a purpose. They're not killing themselves. So this ship is a most recently released to the public because of the attacks on Vega. This was likely fast-tracked to allow for civilians to get their hands on these because of how valuable they proved in the fights against the Van Duel. Now, with that being said, let's move over to the Paladin. We actually don't know a lot about the Paladin, but almost certainly it stems from the same project that created the Valkyrie. Now, the Valkyrie is unique because the Valkyrie is, in and of itself, designed that's wrong. Changed the lore recently. My notes are wrong on this one. So, this was designed shortly after the Hornet was designed. And it was designed in a unique way simply because the Hornet and the Terrapin were direct combat ships or direct combat roles. The Terrapin not so much as the Hornet. The Hornet was doing so well that the Jude Harris Arnold and his teams were like, we don't want to be known simply for combat. We still want to do military contracts, but we don't want to be known simply for combat. So they put together a question and asked a supercomputer to run all of the possible diagnostics and figure out what was the need for ships that the UE Navy was going to have in the coming years. And that process took a long time, and with the results that spat back out were things that they mostly knew themselves, but one of the things it predicted was that it needed that the UE would likely need some sort of transport that they lacked at the time to be able to retake Van Duel controlled systems. A transport that would be able to carry troops and maybe a light ground vehicle to its location. So they developed it in secret. Little did they know, the UE was already doing a feasibility study on that which was pulled from an old feasibility study from the Meser era, which was looking at the Tevarin Wars and what we could learn from the Tevarin Wars. And what they learned from the Tevarin Wars was that the UEE lacked transportation technology. It's just very difficult for the UEE to transport troops and vehicles to the front lines in an efficient way, because they either did these big drop pods, which were like one use, or they used slow traditional haulers. Think of something like the Hull C. And the Hull C isn't really good for landing troops in a combat zone. As a result, they created a brand new department in the military called Starlift Command. Starlift Command has pilots from the Navy and the Marines. It has soldiers from the Marines and the Army. And the idea is that you have this command that can work with all the different branches to move things as it need to. This would lead to the creation of the Hercules series, but it also needed a smaller version for like delivering troops to a specific battlefield. So they put out a call for a troop ship that could carry troops and a small vehicle, just like the supercomputer had predicted it would. And when they put that call out, not only did Anvil already have something for them, they had a working prototype that they'd already been testing for several years. So they immediately won the contract, and that became the Valkyrie. Now, what's likely been happening, we don't have any lore on this, but it's likely been happening in the last couple of years, is just like the success of the Hornet and the Hornet Mark II, there's a lot of parts for Valkyries laying around. They've been around for about 150 years. So in the last 50 to 60 years of Anvil Aerospace, they've been trying their best to see what they can do with what they already have in hand to reduce logistical chains. The Hawk, for instance, was built out of Hornet parts. The Hawk is a Hornet kit bash. It's got some unique parts, but it's mostly made out of components and things that are used to make Hornets. So if you, in theory, have a Hornet, you could repair a Hawk with parts. You could cannibalize one for the other if you needed to, or vice versa. But they only really had the Valkyrie as its own standalone ship. There was nothing really else other than that. And so they began to put together lists of things they need. Heavier vehicle transports that were small enough to put onto smaller areas, because while the M2 and the A2 are very effective at what they do, they're very big and they're very expensive. Whereas they needed a lower profile ship, hence the Asgard. It's clear that the Redeemer did not meet the demands of what they have for gunship capabilities, and the Perseus is too fucking big. And also, at the time this was being developed, almost certainly not in the functions. It was too old to serve a role as a gunship. So, the Paladin was created. These are both essentially kit bashes of the Valkyrie, using similar parts and techniques to create them with some new stuff here and there. Oh, this is brand new as far as we know to the civilian market. We don't know how long the Paladin's been in military service. Could be very recently too. All right, let's go over here and we'll take some questions. So, if you're on Twitch or YouTube, feel free to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Or if you're live here, or if you're on Discord, I don't know if anyone would do. I'm just alone. So what was Anvil's first military contract, or their most recent? Their first military contract was called the Anvil Osprey, and it was a fighter. What was that CIA doc you talked about? We talked about it. I had a pre-show about this one. It's called the CIA World Book. It's cool. Go ahead and read through it. It's neat. What would you say was Anvil's biggest failure? that's a cross between the Carrack and the Gladiator. For different reasons. The Carrack is a failure because it was literally born out of a cover-up. The Navy was sending capital ships, cruisers, to go do exploration missions. And a cruiser got sent into an exploration mission that it wasn't prepared for, and the entire cruiser was lost with all hands. And in that process, they covered up what the mission they were doing, that they were doing exploration missions for a crew that wasn't prepared for it, and quietly built a dedicated exploration and survey vessel, which became the Carrack. And because of that cover-up, the Carrack was heavily secret until it was released to the public. But that process was very complicated because they wanted to release a public version because people knew what it was since the moment it started showing up on military bases. But like, they didn't know its capabilities. They liked it, and a lot of surveyors and stuff like that wanted their own Carracks, but they weren't able to get one until much later. So it's sort of a failure in the sense that it did its job well, but it's born from failure. And similar to the Gladiator was built originally because of a scam. There was this company which claimed that they could build a stealth torpedo, a self-guided stealth torpedo that would penetrate shields and explode. The only downside for that was that it needed to be guided in the entire time. So you needed to have a ship that could physically guide in the shot in order for it to hit. And so they developed, which the Retaliator couldn't do. And the old dive bombers couldn't do either. The old torpedo bombers couldn't do either. So they asked Anvil to create a ship which was called the T3A. And the T3A, T for torpedo, never saw the light of day because the T3A was abandoned when they discovered that the torpedo was a scam. It didn't exist. It didn't do anything that they thought it would. But they were so embarrassed by the fact that they got sent for a ruse because they already spent millions of credits on this, not billions of credits on this, that they quietly covered everything up and then changed the designations of the T3A to the T8A, changing the second pilot seat, which was supposed to be the secondary seat, which was supposed to guide in targets, to a gunner seat, and then marketed it as a fighter, a bomber that can defend itself. That was a bad idea. Didn't do what it was supposed to do. And because no one knew what to do with it, they began to put flunkies into the T8A, which we know as the Gladiator. And so for the most of its first run, it was a death sentence. The Gladiators were sent out alone without escorts and just got mulched. And the pilots were fighter washouts, not bombers. So they didn't know how to fly a bomber. They didn't know how to use anything. So they mostly got mulched. And it wasn't until like the UAE finally realized this is a mistake and actually started to take bomber pilots and have them cross-train as fighter pilots to learn how to use the bomber properly. And then those people ended up becoming instructors themselves and helped to slowly build out the roster of pilots that we actually see the Gladiator start to become quite legendary in its own use, quite honestly. Those are probably the biggest failures. Has every ship been designed by different generations of R&D? Not quite. The Hornet, the Valkyrie, the Terrapin, and the Carrack were all designed by the same generation. They're all the same generation. And then after J. Harris Arnold died, you have the Hawk, the Gladiator, the Mark II Hornet, the Lightning. Also, somewhere in between there is the Atlas chassis, which is the Spartan, the Centurion, the Ballista, and the... that's it. Spartan, Centurion, Ballista. Paul, can the AI blades be used in the Gladiator's turrets? We don't know. Probably. Is there any evidence that Case might have been killed by some competitor, would have been fit in the Messer era? Probably. Case was definitely making waves, so him dying in a spacecraft accident is quite convenient because a lot of people who were against the Messers ended up dying in spacecraft accidents. So it's kind of like, you know, the modern day joke is that if a Russian oligarch dies, he ends up getting pushed out a window after shooting himself in the back 20 times. No. Liberator, we don't know how old that is. It could be a new ship, it could be an old ship. There's not a lot of lore behind it. Hey, Slim Jim Reborn, thank you so much for that Prime sub. Question, are there known stories of Terrapin ships on the patrol in deep space? There's not a lot of known stories. Mostly we know that it was well regarded by its pilots. I wouldn't consider the Carrack a failure then. Yeah, like there's not a lot of ships that are straight up failures in Anvil. Those are the closest to them, because like the Carrack did fail until it succeeded, and same with like the Gladiator. The Gladiator failed until it succeeded. You know a story where the Vandal have already started to be able to bypass both buoys and Terrapin patrols? I don't think of what else. I love your stash. This guy's stash is great. Chimpasa stash, yeah. That's not me. This is me. Looks kind of like me. Gotta shave a little bit, but. So hear me out. Gray's Market, Carrack, Perseus. I can see it. All right, I'm going to get out of the game for now. Thank you, Shimpasta. But I'll still stick around for questions. If you have questions, let me know. Good afternoon there, Gently. It doesn't have to be just about Anvil. It can be about any other things if you have questions about lore. Got my first look at the Paladin yesterday on the floor. What a cool ship. I wish one of the bedrooms was used for something else. I don't know what, though. Doesn't it already have, like, a bay for weapons and armor and stuff like that? So. What's the age gap between the Gladius and the Arrow? 500 years. The Arrow, as far as we know, was very recent, like 2945, 2946. So you're looking at, like... And the Gladius was released in 25... Arrow 2945, Gladius in 2586, 88. So almost 500 years. Gladius, I should say, not Gladiator. Do 2579. I was a little off. All right. What are your thoughts about the Chop Shop Gray's Market? It feels pretty lore accurate for the Belter style pyromaniacs and Nixians. It's headquartered in Odin, in fact, but yeah, it works. I did spawn it and looked around in it. I don't know how much of it's difference or not. Question, what car brand would Anvil be? Anvil's not really a car brand because they more are a military brand. I would say the closest to them would be something like Lockheed Martin. Maybe Grumman. Can you imagine CIG making one of its manufacturers fall in disgrace? Yeah, that's called Drake or Aegis, one of the two. I think my chat's definitely broken. None of my questions got read. I didn't see any of your questions there. You say them earlier? Ask him again there, chewed gumballs. What card brand would Drake be? Lada. There's a lot of failed manufacturers. Elio Harmon, Case Aerospace. Did we get a sub? Knowledge. Are you immediately ending after the lore tour? Yes, I am. We're gonna talk a little bit. Maximum I'll do is another 15 minutes or so. So, because Cam and I wanted to go get our Thanksgiving. Cam's my wife. Our Thanksgiving supplies, but we still need like other supplies. I need to go buy. How did Anvil outdo Aegis? Aegis did this thing called genocide. We're complicit in genocide and tyrannical leader, and ended up on the losing side of a revolution. So they were lucky to not be executed by the new government. It just so happened that all of the new ships that they acquired from the old government were all Aegis, so they still needed to have replacement parts to make their ships work. So they were, instead of dragged out in the street and shot, they were removed with all of their military contracts except for the maintenance. If you don't mind, I asked yesterday, or does Anvil make anything else apart from spaceships? Yes, they make the Atlas chassis. They don't make hand weapons or components or anything like that, but they do make a ground vehicle, which we use. The ballista, the Atlas chassis is because originally it was called an Atlas. If you want to know what an Atlas was, think the Centurion, but ballistic. It was a ballistic Centurion, but it was a bespoke ballistic Centurion. And after that, they built the ballista off the same chassis, which became the Atlas chassis. Then the Centurion, then the Spartan. Does Kruger and Mirai have any military contracts? Mirai might, that we know of. Who is the current oldest human? We don't know. But humans can live up to 150 years. That's the high end we've discovered in the Star Citizen universe. It's like 150 years is the oldest you can live, which is not uncommon for humans to live that old. The main barrier at that point is just the body starts breaking down. Lastly, does Kruger have hand weapons like Bering or Klaus and Werner? No. Not that we know of. They make parts. Like, they make the firing pin for the P8. So the P8 weapons, all of them, the P8 SC, the P8 AR, are all made by Kruger. They're a price manufacturer. Come on. The Atlas chassis is an IFV anti-aircraft with the concept of semi-tanker, potentially military. What was it? The Hemet system? It's the one that the HIMARS comes from. It's similar to that. Do you think CIG might introduce an even bigger Anvil ship in the future? Yes, 100%. It's not an if, it's a when at this point. Any lore or reason on Bremen Defense Force and Super Hornet? Is there a reason why? Yeah. So the Bremen Defense Force is the model of all militia in the UAE. It was formed by the Bremen, the people of Bremen, with heavy support from the local rich population. So like the Kerners. The Kerners, Silas Kerner, for instance, is the founder of Solid Outland. Them and other families who founded the original settlement of Bremen funded a militia to keep them safe, because during the Mezer era and slightly before the Mezer era, there wasn't a lot of money being thrown out for defense, so they needed something to protect themselves. So it became a culture where everyone who became of age was expected to join the defense forces for at least a little bit. So it was sort of like a conscript service, but it was a volunteer conscript services that you were sort of peer pressured into. Everyone wanted to do it because it was sort of like an adventure. You're young, you get to go out into space and do things. But you would often have to bring your own ship. Very rarely would you get supplied it. But because of their tradition, they became very good at what they did, and they had good procedures. They could practice. They would go train frequently. They became the best paramilitary force in the UAE. And so after the and we know this because the Bremen Defense Force threw in with the rebels during the anti-Mezer Revolution. They were actively looking the other way when smugglers were smuggling dissidents out of the system. The people in Bremen hated the Mezers, like absolutely fundamentally to their core hated the Mezers. And the only reason why the Mezers didn't disband the Bremen Defense Force, because they knew the Bremen Defense Force was built to defeat the Mezers if the Mezers ever invaded or tried to impose themselves, was because the Mezers were afraid of the Bremen Defense Force. They're like, that's an insurgency that we do not want to kick over, that hornet's nest. We're just not going to leave it. So when the anti-Mezer Revolution kicked off, the Bremen Defense Force basically helped launch the invasion against the UAE. It's FMTV, not Hemet. Hemet was the missile launcher. Okay, thank you. So after the anti-Mezer Revolution, the Bremen Defense Force became sort of this monolithic, mythical force in the UAE. Like mercenaries whispered their names kind of thing. So any ship that got to be tested by the Bremen Defense Force instantly became a seller. If you could use it as a marketing ploy. And that's really what Anvil was doing by giving the Bremen Defense Force some free Super Hornets, was saying, approved by the Bremen Defense Force. The Bremen Defense Force uses it, you'll like it, kind of thing. Do we know any planets that you still use normal cars? Most cars don't really work like traditional cars. The closest you're going to get are things like the Grey Cat vehicles or the Cyclone, but they use hydrogen. They're hydrogen fuel cell kind of thing. I failed to ask the other day, but when we see a bigger Talon, like a medium or heavy fighter, we talked about it here, the evil clone, or the good clone, I guess, of the good twin of the Hurricane is the Jackal, and I would love to see a Tavaran Jackal be created. It probably won't be called the Jackal because the Jackal is actually an invention of a writer who was on staff at CIG, or was not on staff, was hired to write. He's a pretty, not a big writer, like a famous writer, but he's done a lot of like science fiction, fantasy work in the past, to write a story called The Instrument of Surrender for Jump Point. And the Jackal comes from the Instrument of Surrender. So I don't think they could do the Jackal without paying that guy some fees because he was a contract writer. But they'll probably come up with something similar to the Jackal, just not called the Jackal. A pulp novelist, yeah. But the concept is there. When is Aegis Day? It's the last day. So Friday. How many macaroni does it take to make a necklace? Enough. Called the Anubis. Considering they have the Talon and the why am I blanking on the drop ship? Prowler. It'll probably be something like that. Like the Predator. Or the Wing, or something like that. Yeah, the Tavaran Raptor would make sense. No, the Paladin doesn't have any lore. We talked about it in the walkthrough, but as closest is that it's probably a kit bash of the Valkyrie. Hey, Blam, how you doing? Just so you know, we'll be doing this tomorrow as well for the next day, which is... Checking right now. Grey Cat, Argo, and Consolidated Outland. So that'll be at the same time. We'll go live on Twitch at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we do the recording starts at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be doing that on Wednesday and during Thanksgiving on Thursday, then on Friday for Aegis. No, for Friday, we're going to start on Aegis Day. I'm going to do a lore tour, and then afterwards, and do some discussions. And afterwards, I'm going to be streaming for at least 4 more hours, up to like 6 or 8 afterwards, so that we can for like a mini pubathon. So like if we go beyond our initial run, we'll do some giveaways. We reach our goal, and then on Saturday we'll be doing a full pubathon from beginning of the day to the end of the day. Not too bad. I'm back for my biannual Star Citizen binge. Is there any lore about well-known engineers? Yes, the founder of IAE themselves. She was an engineer who wanted to be a pilot. She grew up on a planet called God. What is the name of it? It's in the the name of the system. It's the name of the Janus twins, or the Gemini twins. The Gemini twins. I can't remember the names of those. The Castor and Pollux. Yeah, Corel. Yeah, so low. New Junction, that's the name of it. So she was born in New Junction. I don't remember her name off the top of my head. I can look it up real quick. Audrey Timmerman is her name. She was born in New Junction. She wanted to fly ships. She wanted to fly ships. So she joined the UAE Navy to fly ships, but she didn't have enough practice flying ships. So she didn't pass her exams to become to the flight school. Instead, her knowledge of ships was turned into to becoming an engineer. And she was there during the capture of a Cartual. And she took all the time she could because she was fascinated by how the Cartual worked, and created sketches and other things that she then, when she got out of the Navy, she decided to build her own version of those thrusters on an Aurora that she called Potty or something like that. Poby. Look at the name of it. It had a cute name. She named her Aurora. Poby. Yeah, Poby. So she, when she left, she used the money in her new citizen status to open up a shop called, what was the name of it? Intergalactic Aerospace Repairs. And when she returned, to open it up, she opened up the shop to repair ships. She built out this modified Aurora, and her friends helped her fly the Aurora to Lo, which is the planet just nearby. It's pretty desolate. And on Lo, they tested out the ship, and it failed spectacularly. But in the process, because of her of her talking about it, a bunch of people came with her to watch her try to fly this thing, and it became a yearly thing where they came out and to see her watch her try to fly the Poby. And over time, it became a ship show where people would bring their ships, their modified ships, and they'd show it off on this moon, on this planet, this desolate planet. A local ship salesman caught on to this and sponsored the event to become a actual event in a place where you could actually breathe the atmosphere in New Junction. And kids came out and all that kind of stuff, and it became so popular that RSI started to come calling and that they called it the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo because of her shop, because Intergalactic Aerospace Repairs. So it was her shop's expo, basically. And from there, it began to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And RSI was the first one to sponsor it, the first big name to sponsor it, because in 2715, they used it as an excuse to showcase their brand new ship called the Constellation. The Constellation made its debut at the first major intergalactic aerospace expo in 2715 or 2712. Which then put it on the map. So. No, that was Aegis. And they were a former Aegis. And it wasn't Basilisk, it was Apocalypse Arms. Sort of Anvil just found the scientists to invent Basilisk armor. No, Basilisk was funded by the UAE. So IAE 2712 was basically a ship launch, which just became the tradition where IAE was always a exotic place where you see exotic new ships, but also the latest lineup of ships to be released by all the manufacturers. Except when they banned Drake for a while. No, Jaded, they actually did ban Drake, because Drake had booth babes, so they banned him for a year because they brought booth babes after they specifically banned booth babes. It was only for a year. They came back the next year. You'd be surprised how many ships made their debut at IAE in fiction. It's how, I talked about earlier, but it's how Asperia launched. Because Victor Hurston needed his Vandal blade fixed up, or glaive fixed up, and they figured out how to do it. Fix up the glaive, and he showed it off at IAE. So Nick's one for 4.5A. I don't know. I don't think so. They haven't put that on the roadmap. We'd have to see. And they said that it was not going to be this year. It was going to be next year. It could be a 4.5.1 or a 4.5.2, but I'm thinking it's probably more a 4.6. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to see Nick's one in 4.5, but I don't think it's going to happen. Gotta remember that they also have Nyx 2 and Nyx 3, which are both basically concepts at this point. And from the sounds of the way they discuss it, it's like it's gonna be a couple of months before they actually release Nyx 1, because it's not ready yet. Because there's always things will change, sort of discussion. If manufacturers did booth babes, who'd be the best? Not Drake. I mean, it is Drake. Mirai. Mirai would do the best. Mirai. Oh, Origin, I can see that. But Mirai would be my guess. Power system security levels determined by the UAE. High sec, low sec, null sec. Advocacy. They look at crime statistics, reported crime statistics, and then they use those reported crime statistics and compare them to other levels. They have like a baseline level for like Earth. And then whatever it jumps up or down depending on based off that that baseline will determine if it's high, medium, or low. They've never been super specific on that because they want to be able to change it if they need to. Any news when we can see those scary giant crab creatures in Star Wars universe? Nothing yet. Not jumping on that, CM Fool. Oh, we went over a little bit. We'll give it another 2 or 3 minutes. What alien race is the most human-like? The Tavaran. Tavaran are shockingly human. That's why they mesh well with human culture. It's also why they hate us and we hate them so much, because they remind us of each other pretty frequently. Is is Terra Earth or a new planet? It's a new planet. So it's technically called Nova Terra or New Earth, and that's the name of the system. The planet itself is called Terra in New Terra, Nova Terra. But it's sort of this paradise world. It's a super Earth. Yes, you can go for it. Democracy intensifies. But it is entirely. It was naturally habitable. It was a complete Earth-like. They've taken a lot of effort. The colonists have taken a lot of effort to preserve the nature of it. It was one of the few, not only Earth-likes, but just like perfect Earth-likes we've ever discovered. And so as a result, a lot of fauna that we use in colonization, like the Kazi grazer, come from Terra itself. It's sort of the other pole of the political and economic sphere. The initial inspiration for Star Citizen was the decline of the Roman Empire in space. So you've got Earth, which represents Rome, and Terra, which represents Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever you want to call it. At the time, it was mostly Byzantium and Constantinople. But as sort of the heart of trade in the East, more relations with the, in this case, the Persians, in this case would be like the Xi'an. Whereas the West, you've got the Vandals at the gates, that kind of thing. I always like to say it's the basis is the Roman Empire, but it is not a one-to-one creation of the Roman Empire. It's simply where they started off as in terms of their comparison. It's evolved dramatically from it. So just to put the simplistic, it's the Roman Empire in space is more of a way of explaining where the framing comes from, not the actual story. Speaking of booth babes, where are the gentlemen's clubs at in lore? They should be in lots of places. We just don't have them in game because either CIG is too afraid of them or is just doesn't see it as a priority. Could the Dvarn have been descendants of a lost colony ship? Probably not. They're very human in the sense that their culture is very human, but they're still very different from humanity. There's no like crossbreeding species like you can in Star Trek. They're all uniquely different. Yeah, bird people. All right, this is the last question I'll take. If regen med-gel costs so much and the universe is being so dangerous, personal injury / life insurance is probably going to be coming. Is there anything that'll be like that currently for the plebeian planet dwellers? Yeah, there's insurance, health insurance. As I like to say, welcome to the dystopian future, far future, capitalist hellspace that is the Star Citizen universe, aka America. I love that so many people are mad that the game is going to have American healthcare insurance, and it's like, well, maybe you'll have a little bit more sympathy for us poor bastards. It makes sense in terms of the gameplay mechanic, though. The idea being you have to pay a certain amount of money for basic coverage. It's actually probably going to be better than American healthcare insurance because it'll actually pay out for some of those things, but it'll only cover certain parts of it. So you'll still have to pay out of pocket for some other parts. Is there any info as why Anvil hasn't developed any capital ships for the UAE? Not that we know of yet. There's always been sort of an unwritten rule where Anvil produced the smaller ships and RSI produced the larger ships. They just probably don't have the industrial capacity to do so yet. All right, y'all. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this, make sure you hit that follow button on Twitch. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon notified to be released, and hit the like button. It'll help as well. Comment down below as well any of your thoughts. I'll be back tomorrow for some Argo, Grey Cat, and all of those Consolidated Outland, all that wonderful stuff. But until then, like I always say, remember, ex Historia ad Astra.